Hi, I'm Benjamin Payne. At the K-12 Education Office at Hillsdale College, we support school founding groups and their efforts to start classical schools across the country. Finding the right leader is one of the first and most important steps to building a successful school. While we do consider experience in education, we seek candidates who exhibit unwavering personal integrity, honesty, courage, and servant-hearted leadership. Perhaps that's you. If you're looking to engage in fulfilling, impactful, and challenging work protecting our nation's future and building up the next generation of virtuous citizens, we'd love to hear from you. I'm looking for strong school leaders right now. Learn more about how you can make a difference at hillsdale.edu/leader. hillsdale.edu/LEADER. That's hillsdale.edu/leader.
Welcome to the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, bringing you insight into classical education and its unique emphasis on human virtue and moral character, responsible citizenship, content-rich curricula, and teacher-led classrooms. Now your host, Scot Bertram.
Thanks for listening. The Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast is part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. You also can find more information on topics and ideas discussed on this show at our website, k12.hillsdale.edu. We're joined by Abigail Teska. She is an art teacher at Seven Oaks Classical School in Ellettsville, Indiana, also master teacher in art for Hillsdale College's K-12 office. Abigail, thanks so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Scott, for having me. I'm glad to be here today.
Before we talk a bit about an overview of art at a Hillsdale K-12 school, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into teaching, a little about Seven Oaks.
So currently, I teach grammar, middle, and high school art classes at Seven Oaks Classical School. I also, in my time there, taught some history courses, and I really enjoy working with all ages of students. I think one of the reasons that I was really interested in teaching for one of Hillsdale's K-12 schools was I actually received a classical education my whole academic life. Mm-hmm. And I think it was sometime in high school, maybe about when I started studying for some state tests to think about college, I started really appreciating the gift of education that I had received and decided for myself that I wanted to continue in this model of education. So therefore, I found myself at Hillsdale College and I followed my passions and double majored in history and art. And that's part of the reason why I teach history and art as well. And actually, the other day, I was just reflecting on my experience at Hillsdale College, and I thought back to my senior art show. Mm-hmm. And the title of my senior art show was Details in the Stillness. And it was essentially all about looking and observing the small, everyday, mundane things all in the world around you and learning to appreciate them and seeing beauty in them. So my goal in the art show was to challenge the viewers to look at beauty in their lives and appreciate it. And I'm so blessed to get up every day and go to Seven Oaks and train the minds and inform the hearts of over 200 students each and every day. We get to look at beautiful things and try to appreciate them more fully. So it's essentially a dream come true.
Do you end up showing your students anything from that art show?
Once in a while. So actually, sometimes the first lesson of the school year, I like to show them a little bit of my art. And actually, one time, I made the mistake of having them compare Cézanne, who I absolutely admire and want to emulate in my work, Paul Cézanne, and one of my still lifes. And I asked them to compare the works of art. Now, I guess maybe I did too good of a job in educating the students because some of my middle schoolers pointed out the fact that my artwork was more realistic than Cézanne's and therefore less successful in achieving his vision. And I was a little blown away by that.
Let's talk about art in a Hillsdale College K-12 school. What do students learn about art in one of our schools?
Yes. So the study of art in a Hillsdale K-12 school is an integrated study. And students study art in grades K through 8, which differs from traditional public education. And this is such a gift to our students. During that period of 9 years, students study over 500 masterpieces and about the same number of master artists who dedicated their lives to the study and appreciation of beauty. In our class, we discuss the advances and changes in the production of art over a period of about 17,000 years, from the ancient cave paintings in France about 15,000 years ago, all the way to the revival of classical painting in the 21st century with artists who are actually still alive today. We don't just travel chronologically, we also travel around the world. So we visit all the major countries and cultures and study the art produced there. One of my favorites is we debate beauty and what is beautiful and what meaning that has for our lives. And finally, we study various different types of art media that the master artists use, and we learn how to use those media and incorporate it in our projects.
How does a classical approach to art instruction differ from perhaps what you'd see in other schools?
I think, first of all, classical education is sometimes we think of buzzwords or buzz phrases, and those are some of the tenets or the key things we're looking for in a classical education. But first and foremost, we're focusing more on how we're learning than what we're learning. So for instance, using Socratic discussion questions help lead students from less of an understanding of a work of art that maybe they've never seen before and they don't have the techniques or skills to really appreciate it. And we use a variety of levels of questioning to help the students make discoveries and appreciate the work of art and leave the classroom with a sense of awe and wonder. One of the things we focus on in a classical art education is subject integration or cross-curricular connections. So essentially, we've done math, science, history, geography, Greek and Latin roots, all in the art room. And my goal as an educator, or one of my goals as an educator, is not just to have students love art and love analyzing and seeing beauty in their lives, but also have an appreciation for the other subjects. So sometimes when we do math in the art classroom, in connection with the rule of thirds, when we're looking at a work of art, now all of a sudden students are going to go back to their math class and want to really focus and learn the next math concept, because maybe, just maybe, it'll become useful in learning something more in art.
Are you able to coordinate some of the things that the students are learning in art class with perhaps things they're learning in history or something they're learning in English?
Absolutely. So when we're thinking about the Hillsdale K-12 curriculum, it naturally lends itself very easily and naturally to what we call a vertical alignment. So often, for instance, in third grade, students are learning ancient Roman art, and they're also learning about ancient Roman history at the same time. So the two are working together. Actually, something kind of funny happened this year. In fourth grade, there's a cross-curricular connection with Washington crossing the Delaware River. Mm-hmm. And this work of art is actually featured in their history book that they read in class. And so usually I know when they come to my class, they'll already know what it is. And sometimes I get a grumble or groan like, oh, we have to look at this again. And I tell the students that, I guess I tell them to have an open mind, because we are going to discover things that they don't know and that they wouldn't even imagine ever. And it's always such an exciting experience when we get to make those connections and really bring the things that they're studying to life.
So who should study art? And from our perspective at a Hillsdale K-12, why is it for everyone along that path from K to 8?
Yeah, that's a really excellent question. And I think that really goes to the core of art education and what the purpose of art education is. So when you think about the word art, or when most people think about the word art, and you don't have to be an artist to think about art, it immediately suggests skill. You have to be skilled at art to be good at art. And I know many people in my life, even family members, who say something like, oh, I could never do that. I'm not artistically, or I don't think artistically, or I just don't have the skill. And this is also the way traditional public schools think about art education, right? They introduce students in the elementary grade levels to art class, and they get to take art class. And if students show the aptitude and skill and desire to continue, they might take some middle school or high school art classes. But many students who maybe don't have the interest or appreciation for art or the skill for art will just stop taking art class. And in my mind, that's such a shame because they miss out on learning about beautiful things and really enhancing and growing, not just academically, but also personally. So the way Hillsdale K-12 education views art education is with another synonym of art, which is craft. And when we think about the word craft, we think about expertise in doing or making something. So essentially, in our art education, we are exposing students to the best artifacts of human craft, and we are helping them appreciate those works of art more fully.
Talking with Abigail Teska, who is an art teacher at Seven Oaks Classical School in Ellettsville, Indiana, and also a master teacher in art for Hillsdale College's K-12 office. What's the purpose of an art class? You mentioned people hear that phrase and think about skill. So advancing skill, advancing appreciation. What's the purpose of these art classes?
So the first and foremost goal or purpose of art class is actually not the accumulation of skill. That's not the goal of art class. The goal of art class is the apprehension of beauty, specifically as found in master works of art. Our goal is to help students to see things that are beautiful, to appreciate them to the best of their ability, and to be appropriately moved by them with reverence and respect and awe and a sense of wonder.
How do you instruct students to properly consider beauty in an art class, to look at something and appreciate the skill of the artist, the message, the tone, the feelings he or she is trying to convey? How do you instruct students to properly appreciate what they're seeing?
I think the first thing to consider when thinking about helping students appreciate a work of art is the fact that for most students, even students who have been in a classical education setting, they're looking at something they've probably never seen before, and they may not even have the skills or the insights to understand it all by themselves. That's why, for instance, if you're teaching the 8th grade curriculum in abstract expressionism and Jackson Pollock, you might have an 8th grader who shouts out something like, well, it just looks like they flung paint on the canvas. Mm-hmm. Anyone could do that, even a kindergartner. And obviously that student hasn't been taught to appreciate beauty in the things that they're looking at. That's just their initial, I guess you could say, primal response of sorts. So like anything in classical education, I think there's a tried and true model for how to better appreciate a work of art and how to help students think through the process of analyzing and appreciating a work of art better. But before we get into that tried and true model, I have two fun ways of thinking about helping students seek and appreciate beauty in a work of art. And the first way is something I nicknamed as the visual archaeologist. So essentially, we have our toolkit. Maybe that's the elements of art. Maybe that's some basic historical knowledge about the time period or the artist or something along those lines. And we essentially have to take our tools and dig deep. And we have to analyze every component of the work of art, the materials used, the process used, the elements of the composition. And through really looking closely and thinking deeply, we can unpack and really discover maybe the message of the artwork or the purpose of the artwork or just really appreciating beauty. A second fun way, I guess, to think about appreciating a work of art is actually suggested in the words of an artist, Marc Chagall. Marc Chagall was a Russian-American artist who immigrated from Russia to America. And he made some beautiful works of stained glass. He also made a work of art called I in the Village that students study in 7th grade. Anyways, he suggests that in viewing art, art needs a withinness, which is kind of a weird word, withinness. So essentially, he's inviting you, the viewer, to enter in to the work of art, right? Similar to the art archaeologist. It's just a different way of phrasing it. But I think this goes a step further where you're not just entering into the artwork, but you're also entering into the mind of the artist. So you're exploring their artistic vision and the technical execution of their work of art.
And what about that tried and true process you had mentioned, the model to help students appreciate the beauty inherent in a work of art?
Absolutely. So I think there's 3 steps to really appreciating a work of art. And you can use this 3-step process to plan your discussions, to think about a lesson, to think about a unit. So there's really lots of uses for this. Additionally, if you're just a listener who wants to learn to appreciate art better, you can absolutely use this process as well. So the process is threefold. We start with the elements and then the context and craft of the work of art. So the elements are the elements of art, which are the building blocks of any composition. Fun fact, you need at least 2 elements of art to make up any work of art. And the students always try to debate me on this one, but even a dot on the board has 2 elements of art. So the elements of art are color, line, shape, value, form, texture, and space. So you start by finding those elements of art in the work of art and discussing how the artist uses those elements of art. Second level or layer to appreciating the beauty in a work of art is the context for that work of art. So what are the historical circumstances that provide, again, context for that work of art? What art history movement is this work of art a part of? Is the work of art breaking the confines of a movement? Is the artist contributing to that movement in a different way? The context provides a framework that is excellent for comparison. So, for instance, in 6th grade, students study 2 versions of a David sculpture, a Renaissance sculpture and a Baroque sculpture. And just by analyzing how the artist portrayed the face and the body and the feet and the hair even, students can compare those and make predictions about how the Baroque era is different from the Renaissance era and how the Baroque era is actually responding in a contradictory manner to the Baroque era. When we're talking about the context, we're not just thinking about outside circumstances, we're also thinking about the message that the artwork conveys. So an artwork conveys through a couple of things, usually through its subject matter, so what the painting is about, or through symbolism or metaphor. Finally, we think about the third component, which is craft. And essentially, craft is, again, right, expertise in doing, as we talked about earlier. So you can think about the medium that the artist uses or explores, the possibilities and limitations of that medium, and the skill required to bring about the finished result of the beautiful painting.
Now, there are people who sincerely think the Beatles made bad music. People who sincerely say The Godfather is not a good movie. Let's say a student goes through the process, examines elements, contents, craft, at the end says, I still don't like it. I don't think it's beautiful. I'm sure that's happened. What is that conversation like?
I think that's a really interesting thing to consider. And I think one of the beautiful things in classical education is that you should never think that you're right and you know the truth and that's it, right? I think part of the goal of art class is to help students consider these things and give them the tools to figure out what beauty is. But going back to the beginning of our discussion today, I mentioned that they debate what is beautiful. And so, yes, there are objective standards of beauty, and that's something that's very important to classical education. But at the same time, I do talk to students about artistic license, right? They do have an ability, once they've studied the masters and once they've learned about I guess, the elemental principles of art, and they've come to appreciate it, they can begin to make their own judgments. And I think another way we look at this is the stages of, I guess, student growth and development. Often in classical education, we talk about the grammar and the logic and the rhetoric stage. And that rhetoric stage is more where they're making artwork of their own choosing and they're thinking about things for themselves. And at that point, they're kind of envisioning their own finished product as well. So maybe breaking the confines of what we're suggesting as beautiful and thinking about it in their own way. Along with that, I think even if someone doesn't like a work of art, I think sometimes liking or disliking a work of art, it can be a lack of just knowledge generally about it. Or maybe they don't like some aspect of it, but while they don't like some aspect of it, there is still something beautiful about it. So for instance, in 6th grade, students look at a work of art called The Slave Ship. And it almost does the opposite thing. It's an example of romanticism. And essentially, this is a new kind of history painting that's portraying the bad things in history. So it's not glorifying anything, war anymore. It's essentially showing the horrors of war. So you look at the full work of art and it's beautiful. You're like, beautiful sunset and beautiful ship in the ocean. And then you zoom in closer and essentially there's all these mangled bodies of slaves that were thrown from the ship in order to, I guess, so the slave owners could get their money instead of, losing out on those slaves. And so this is almost doing the opposite thing of what you're suggesting. At first, it looks beautiful, but then later on, it doesn't so much. There's something about it that's not beautiful. It's actually disturbing. And going back to the Jackson Pollock as well, right? At first, maybe students, I've experienced this when I taught 8th grade. At first, students don't like it. And then all of a sudden, once you're studying the technique and you're thinking about the craft and the context and the elements, then all of a sudden they appreciate it so much more. So I think usually having the debate with students or letting them voice their, I guess, opinion that they don't think something is beautiful can actually be really powerful to your discussions and what you're learning in art class.
Abigail Teska is art teacher at Seven Oaks Classical School in Ellettsville, Indiana, and master teacher in art for Hillsdale's K-12 office. Abigail, thank you so much for joining us here on the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast.
Thank you so much, Scott.
I'm Scot Bertram. We invite you to like us on Facebook. Search for Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education. You also can follow us on Instagram at Hillsdale_K12. Hillsdale_K12 on Instagram. Thank you for listening to the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio.